Well, it's time to get more now from Dr. Webster Tarpley. He's an author and historian joining us live from Washington. I'd also like to welcome Mr. Sabri Malek, spokesman for the Libyan Democratic Party, with us from London. And on the line from Detroit is Mr. Abayomi Azikiwe. He's editor of the Pan-African Newswire. Thanks so much, gentlemen, for joining us. I'll put the first question to Dr. Tarpley in Washington. Dr. Tarpley, the former regime's spokesman Musa Ibrahim said earlier that the resistance to NATO aggressors, in his words, is about to begin, and he even offered NATO another chance for a ceasefire to avoid, in his word, a civil war. How probable do you think that is? Is the Gaddafi side strong enough to set off a new round of resistance at this stage?
I think if we compare Libya to Iraq, you'll see that in the case of the U.S. blitzkrieg against Iraq, there was a period of several months when resistance practically ceased or went down to a very low level, although it did then boil over some months later. In the case of Libya, I think the support for Colonel Gaddafi and his government is substantial, and it will lead to the fact that the resistance here will never cease. Since you've mentioned Sirte, I want to call attention to this genocidal disaster. This is a true atrocity. People remember the bombing of Guernica in the Spanish Civil War. People remember the rape of Nanjing by the Japanese in the 1930s. We're seeing now the genocide of Sirte. This is NATO bombing with the rebel forces, the NATO puppet forces, forming a cordon around the outside of the city to prevent refugees from leaving. This is genocide. And I think it's time to call on the NATO powers to cease this bombing. The other important point that I would make at the beginning, very great concern here in Washington about the new military governor of Tripoli. This is Belhaj, alias Hasidi, alias Hassadi, alias Asadak. It's a al-qaeda terrorist veteran. He is a person who is a close personal friend of bin Laden, trained with bin Laden in Afghanistan at those camps. He organized jihadis to go into Iraq and Afghanistan to kill U.S. soldiers. He presumably has killed U.S. soldiers himself. He is now the military governor of Tripoli. He is now directing a reign of terror there. As I predict that as soon as the U.S. Congress comes back from the current recess, there will be a scandal here which will shake the very heavens about the Obama administration supporting terrorism, now concretized in the figure of Belhaj Hasidi Hassadi, the military dictator and ruler of Tripoli.
All right, questions there raised about both revolutionary fighters and revolutionary leaders and the role of NATO. I'll come back to that later on. Mr. Malik, I'd just like to have you in discussion as well. Would you agree with the comments there by Dr. Tarpley that, in fact, the supporters of Gaddafi are strong enough and that this resistance will continue and we're not going to see peace yet in Libya?
This is partially true. Gaddafi has some support within some tribes in Libya. We don't want a civil war. The problem is that we have a political vacuum. This is caused by the NTC. The unqualified support of the West of the NTC is causing us problems. The NTC has to become a democratic entity so it can help in the transition into democracy. But because the NTC is largely led by ex-Gaddafi men, we have a problem. Now, what is needed is that Dr. Mahmoud Jibril al-Urfalli, who is the actual head of the NTC, he has to come down to Libya. Instead of flying from one city to another in Europe, in the West, or staying in his five-star hotel in Doha, he has to come down to Libya and negotiate with his own tribe, Burfalla tribe, which is protecting Gaddafi in the city of Ben Walid and giving him safety and support. This tribe is still shelling our cities and towns. He has to negotiate with them to stop this maddening civil war.
Okay, I'd like to go to Detroit now, Mr. Azikiwe. Let's bring him into the discussion as well. Mr. Azikiwe, speaking about what's happening in Sirte now, before we move on with the discussions of how NATO is involved in all of this, presuming that the revolutionary fighters do capture Sirte, does that mean that they have achieved victory and the violence is going to be over now?
No, it does not mean that the Transitional National Council, the TNC or the NTC, has achieved victory. We always have to keep in mind the primary role of the United States and NATO in this whole war. This is something that had been planned for many, many years. Even the Operation Mermaid Dawn, according to published accounts, over the last 10 days had been planned for some 10 weeks. We have to understand that we've had intensive U.S. and NATO bombing of this country now for well over 5 months. 20,000 sorties, approximately 7,500 airstrikes. Thousands of people have lost their lives. Hundreds of thousands of people have lost their jobs. They've been displaced. There's a mounting humanitarian crisis that's going on right now in Tripoli as well as other parts of the country because NATO forces and their NTC allies have attacked the oil industry. They've attacked factories, water supply systems, food storage facilities, communication installations, and hospitals. Over the last 6 months, we saw the conditions that existed in the Abu Salim hospital in South Tripoli just several days ago, where there were hundreds of people who were left to die in very deplorable conditions. And this is happening in many different areas of Libya right now. This is clearly a war against the people in Libya, and there is no plan on the part of the Transitional National Council. They don't have the capacity even to form a provisional government. This is quite clear. You talk about the potential resistance from people who support the al-Fatah revolution of Gaddafi. That is ongoing. There's fighting that's still taking place in Tripoli, around Sirte and other areas in the western part of the country. There's still shelling of Misrata and also the border area that they said that fell just several days ago. But at the same time, if we look at the internal political dynamics of the NTC itself, they're not a cohesive group.
Right.
And there's going to be bound to be some splits and conflicts even within the group itself.
Right.
So what NATO has done is created a horrible situation that's going to necessitate the deployment of the United Nations and also other Western military forces to try to bring about some type of stability in the country, and that in and of itself is going to bring about even more instability.
All right, some concern that's been raised here about how the revolutionary leaders are dealing with things is the fact that we saw reports, we heard reports rather, of bodies being found purportedly belonging to mercenaries in their words, but a lot of people are saying, is that true? Dr. Tarpley, if I can put this question to you, when you say that there is resistance still, that there are supporters for Muammar Gaddafi, who do you think these fighters are? Would you agree that they are mercenaries from other countries?
My experience of Tripoli about 6 weeks ago now, attending one of those large demonstrations pro-Gaddafi on the Green Square, was that there is a very, very substantial base of support which cuts across these tribal structures. It's based on politics. It's based on the welfare state, the social safety net that Gaddafi has created, lifting Libya from the most impoverished in Africa to the most advanced country in Africa, beating out Russia, Ukraine, Brazil in the United Nations Human Development Index. But these massacres, the atrocities that we're seeing, they're generally attributed by CNN and the BBC and Al Jazeera to the Gaddafi forces. I would look again. You have got a figure there. I'm talking about Belhaj, alias Hassadi, alias Hasidi. His signature is mass murder. He has left a trail of bodies across the globe. Right now, you can even see on Al Jazeera that they're singling out black Libyans, or indeed anybody black. You can be from Fezzan in Libya, or you can be a guest worker from Mali or Chad or some other African country, and you are going to be persecuted and hounded and maybe lynched and executed by these NATO puppet rebel forces. I think it would be time for Hasidi Belhaj, this guy who operates under aliases, the current military governor, needs to be arrested and put on trial for genocide, and also he is heavily implicated in the killing of Yunus, of the previous military commander of the rebels, who was assassinated at the end of July, and it's an assassination in which Jalil and Jibril are presumably also complicit. The finance minister, Harouni, is complicit in that assassination. So we've got a gang of murderous thugs, and it's time at the very minimum, for the United States to stop giving them billions of dollars, stop giving them heavy weapons, stop giving them diplomatic support, stop giving them this media support. And again, I predict that once the Congress gets back from the Labor Day recess, this will be the mother of all scandals will break out here on the banks of the Potomac.
All right, let's discuss that issue now. Mr. Malik, tell us what you think about these revolutionary leaders, with the comments being made there by Dr. Tarpley that they are linked to al-qaeda, that they are linked to terrorists, and you did say in your remarks it's not certain whether they can move Libya toward the transition process. Do you think that they are able to maintain security for the Libyan people, that they will bring about the transition process that Libyan people are expecting of them? And also the issue of transparency as well here. We heard Mustafa Abdul Jalil saying that he's ready to face trial for the crimes that he may have committed during his time in power. Do you think that this is going to actually translate into practice, not just for him, but also the other members of the council?
First of all, I would like to say that Gaddafi ruined Libya. It's not true that he developed Libya, he found it a ruined state, then he developed it. The opposite is true. Libya in 1969 was developing very well indeed, and Gaddafi ruined everything. This is why we have the revolution. People don't revolt and die in their tens of thousands because things are good. No, they died because things are bad. Regarding the situation now in Libya, I agree that al-qaeda has the upper hand. This is partly because NATO supported the NTC completely and did not dispute its non-democratic credentials. This created a power vacuum in the country, and al-qaeda is capitalizing on that. This is why I need to add that al-qaeda is, to a great extent, is a Saudi creation. As long as we have this Wahhabi distorted version of Islam spread by the Saudi intelligence, ruining the minds of Arab youth, and Muslim youth, indeed Muslim youth, we cannot stop this problem of fundamentalism. This is why we in the Democratic Party, we ask for the help of the United Nations. We cannot have a transition, a peaceful transition to democracy in Libya without the help of United Nations.
All right, Mr. Azikiwe, tell us what you think NATO's role has been in this. Do you think that NATO is to blame for failing to rather investigate who these people are, or rather ignoring it, or even purposefully not trying to say, all right, let's see who is running affairs there, who is linked to al-qaeda, what are these allegations about, and being rather too hasty in recognizing the revolutionary leaders as the sole representatives of the Libyan people?
Well, they saw an opportunity to intervene in Libya, something that had been planned for many, many years. We have to keep in mind that people like Haftar, who was here in the state of Virginia for decades, had been supported by the American Central Intelligence Agency. He was flown back to Libya in February, ostensibly to head up the rebellion. I think that the Western industrialized countries, including the United States, want to take full control of the oil industry in Libya, the natural gas resources in Libya. It's a strategically located country in North Africa, and I disagree with Mr. Malik. All we have to do is look at even the ruling class in the United States, the American Central Intelligence Agency fact book, which has been no friend to the Libyan government, at least over the last 2 years. If you read that, it indicates very clearly that there's been tremendous economic growth in Libya over the last 42 years under the Gaddafi government. Even according to the Central Intelligence Agency, they have one of the highest standards of living in Africa. They have been involved in many projects, the development of the water resources there, the oil industry, also supporting other African countries throughout the continent. And this is why the African Union is withholding recognition of the rebels in Libya, because of the racism that has been exhibited over the last several months. We've had dark-skinned Africans in Libya who have been imprisoned, who have been beaten, who have been tortured, and even lynched. This has been documented in several videos. villages where the inhabitants, the majority of them were dark-skinned Africans, have been cleared out. Africans were run out of Misrata and other areas in the western part as well as the eastern part of Libya. It's clearly a process of genocide, racism, and also forced removal of millions of people inside Libya. Also, the refugees who have taken flight to Tunisia have also been victims of this type of racial discrimination. This has done a lot to destroy relations between so-called Arabs and Africans in North Africa. And this is a process that's part and parcel of the same U.S. Africa Command, the Pentagon plans to reconquer and neo-colonize areas throughout North Africa and throughout the entire African continent. They have other countries that have been targeted as well in this whole process. So I do believe very firmly that this is a plot on the part of NATO to seize control of the resources of Libya for the pure benefit of the ruling classes, the banks and the oil industries that are based here in the United States as well as Western Europe.
Let's just make something clear here. The idea that the West is after a plot for Libya's resources does raise a lot of questions about how good a dictator, how bad a dictator Gaddafi was, or even if he was good for the Libyan people or not. I'd like to make it clear, Dr. Tarpley, if you could respond to the point made there by Mr. Malek, that people were in fact fed up with Gaddafi's regime, that the reason why they initially started this revolution was because they didn't feel that they had rather enough of the resources of their country, that everything was in the hands of one family, and they did feel the pressure of poverty. What's your response to that then?
Having been to Tripoli and looked around considerably, I would dispute those points. I think, again, if you look at the United Nations Human Development Index, you'll see Libya at number 57 in the world. They're beating 130 countries, beating Russia, beating Ukraine, beating Brazil, tops in Africa. It's hard to argue with that kind of a statistic. On the other side, we look at the mechanics of this rebellion. It was started in London and Paris November 2nd with the signature of a secret treaty last year, Operation South Mistral. That was supposed to be a drill. The drill went live, as so often happens. The bombing then became real on the 19th of March. And now we've seen this a rebellion that could never have advanced 1 inch without NATO carpet bombing, NATO Apache helicopters strafing civilians with machine guns, massive killing of civilians by NATO. And then when they finally staged their triumphal march into the Green Square, the initial version of that, of course, was fake. It was done on a sound stage, a Hollywood set located in Doha, Qatar, with actors, probably all the unemployed actors of Beirut were there acting out the roles of Libyans. So this has been a fraud from beginning to end. This has been a NATO psy war. Of course, there's an al-qaeda infantry. There's an al-qaeda rabble. They've gotten foreign fighters from Pakistan, from Afghanistan. They've gotten jihadis, fanatics from all over the world, with a sprinkling then of romantic youth, families that had grudges against Gaddafi, people from the Benghazi, Tobruk area that are nostalgic for the monarchy of King Idris, reactionaries, adventurers of all sorts. So this is now what it is. Looking ahead, though, we're going to see the UN General Assembly. I'm wondering whether this new government, if that's what we call it, the Jibril Jalil operation, will they recognize Israel when we get to the vote, if they get into the UN General Assembly? When the vote on the Palestinian state comes up, will Jalil and Jibril vote with the U.S., who are going to veto it and block it, or will they vote for the Palestinian state? So all kinds of interesting questions. Okay. Will it be Royal Dutch Shell and BP? Will it be Total? Will it be ExxonMobil running the country? Those are the questions that now arise, because it sure won't be Libyans.
All right, Mr. Malek, your response to that. There is a suggestion that the media portrayal of the war in Libya has been, to some extent, one-sided, effectively covering or hiding the reasons why Western powers would not want Gaddafi to remain in power, and that the intervention is now leaving the French and Spanish and Italian companies rather than the Chinese and Russian companies in first place to invest in Libya's oil.
Well, I'd like to say that Gaddafi ruined Libya. I don't know where your guests are getting their statistics from. I don't know whether it's a good idea to deceive people
UN,
like that.
UN Human Development Program.
What I would like to say, what I would like to add, is that Gaddafi has done something which he was very successful in, and that is by giving our wealth, our oil wealth, to people all over the world. This is why we have supporters of him, not Libyans, but from all over the world. And this is why, because Gaddafi saw himself as a world leader, not just a leader of Libya, this is why he squandered our wealth all over the world, and he has supporters. Now, all over the world, we see that, for example, we see the African mercenaries fighting for him in Libya because he gave them money. He's been spending his money, our money, in Africa. We have mercenaries fighting for him from Eastern Europe. We have mercenaries fighting for him from South America. We Libyans have never benefited from our wealth under Gaddafi. The suffering of Libyan people is imaginable.
Mr. Malik,
and
I'll have to stop
your
you,
guests are saying is just deceiving.
Because we've run out of time, I'm extremely sorry for that. Mr. Sabri Malek, spokesman of the Libyan Democratic Party, joining us there live from London. A big thank you as well to Dr. Webster Tarpley, author and historian in Washington. And on the line from Detroit with us was Mr. Abu Yomi Azikiwe, editor of Pan-African Newswire. Thanks so much for staying with us. From me, Homa Lesgi, and our team here in Tehran, it's goodbye.